I had an experience recently. The wisdom of the elders I always bring with me. The learnings I have as I read more on our Indigenous peoples' way of raising children, ways of living the good life. And you know, I was really struck recently. I went with friends to Queenston near Niagara-on-the-Lake. And there, you should really visit it. There is a beautiful, beautiful sculpture garden that is a recognition of what the Indigenous soldiers made a difference in the War of 1812. And in fact, there are those who say that without the Indigenous soldiers, we would be a different country than we are now. We would not have won that war, or whatever the outcome would have been very different. But you know, one of the things that the guide was telling us was that the American Constitution used as an essential resource the agreements that the Six Nations had put together. So their basis of democracy for the American Constitution was in fact very much influenced by the wisdom that had already been in place with our Six Nations that had created how can we work better together as community. Well, you know, it just struck me as how devastating what has happened to our Indigenous people has been, how unbelievably resilient that they have survived with huge, huge cost, but how they have survived what has happened to them. So I share that with you as hoping that for you it's as much of an eye-opener to say that we can learn about democracy as the US in their Constitution did by thinking and learning more about the teachings of the elders. The teachings that resonated with me when I first heard Tom Porter was he talked about children as the sacred ones. So as we think about self-reg for the rest of this week, I want to infuse that thought for you. That as you're learning from Linda and Paula and all of the different people who will be speaking here today, see how clearly children are seen through soft eyes, but are at the heart of it seen as sacred, are seen as special and unique in their own individual right. You know, we have signed on to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child in Canada. The US has not. I was recently in Michigan, and I learned that in the law in Michigan, it is okay to provide an inadequate education by law. And I went, but you know, that's against the, and then went, oh yeah, there are two countries who have not signed the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, Somalia and the United States. But you know, you have to have a North Star. You have to have a, this is what I know to be true. So if we think about the next 7 generations when decisions are being made, then we have to sit up and pay attention and say, hold on a second, what are we doing making decisions that are having such a negative impact on our kids? We've got this absolutely fantastic world. Canada just rated #1 for quality of life, right? We rated #1. Well, they didn't frickin' ask me. Because I'll tell you, we have a great life. But if we knew how we were managing to screw up our kids in terms of their anxiety that I'll talk about, then we should get an award so we could change it. I think what we need to be doing is thinking about what are we in the business of? And recently I'm reading a book about purpose and a sense of meaning in school by Heather Mallon. And it's influencing my thinking. How many of you have seen Simon Sinek's talk? Google it, guys. Write this one down. It is so worth looking at. So why do I bring Simon Sinek, and why do I want us to think this week about why we are here? What he talks about are successful companies. And the really successful companies are not the ones who focus on what they deliver or how they deliver it, but why. What are they in the business of? And so I speak to lots of educators and really talk about why are we in the business of education? How many of you here are educators? All right, so the majority by far. So what are we in the business of? And I'm going to suggest to you that what we have seen is a massive, massive shift. We've seen a shift in the purpose of education. That it used to be, and Stephen here has a wonderful, wonderful radio program that Susan will talk about, and interviews lots of people who think deeply about education. But we've seen a huge and necessary shift across the world that says we need to be focusing on way, way more than just academic achievement. That in fact, for the world that our kids are going to live in, we need to have well-being at the heart of that. I'll talk more about that later. But what that means is that we absolutely need to see ourselves as human developers, as educators. That no longer is it good enough to think about yourself as some do, though many of you in this room are not those some. Can you say that? Are not those some? It's very hard to say. Just try it. The content deliverers are no longer going to be meeting the educational needs. And if we think of education then, as it is derived from its derivative, it really is more about lighting the fire within, like child in our indigenous language is he who has the light within. Education is about lighting that fire. It's not about filling the bucket. Or as I say in some famous videos, not about stuffing the duck. What do I mean by stuffing the duck? That is, we've got this, we know this adult curriculum that we are going to feed into our kids. Well, I'll tell you some stories about schools that I've visited that have made a huge, huge impression on me and on thinking about what are kids capable of. So we need to be thinking about the why of what we do. And what the why is, I'm suggesting, is as human developers. And when we think about being human developers, wow, hello, self-reg framework.